Hello, geeks and ghouls. We're back into Lovecraftian horror with Ted Klein's The Black Man with a Horn. Ted Klein is one of those very eclectic authors. He has a very small output, 2 novels and some novellas. I really want to find and read his book Ceremonies, his debut novel, and he's also very well known for being the organizer of the World Fantasy Convention and as well the World Fantasy Award. So yeah, that's an interesting fellow, I guess. He is a guy who has writer's block and says that he could do anything to avoid writing, so he's a writer after my heart. And The Black Man with a Horn is a Cthulhu mythos novella of his that is very well known, and it's quite interesting. It's a very intricate sort of novella. It's really interesting to read it because the way it's structured, it's very Lovecraftian in style, but also it avoids some of the worst cliches of the genre, like, having the main character scribble down something as the monster comes closer, etc. It's the story of an elderly writer who has lived his life in the shadow of Lovecraft. He was one of Lovecraft's disciples, but he lived on, and the only reason he is known by people know him in the age of story, is that he was a friend of Lovecraft and he has written Lovecraftian stories, and he bemoans that. He was in a convention in Paris. It's a guy in his 70s, I believe. So he was in a convention in London. He flies back to New York, and then after some mishaps, it's a very humorous way of saying this, and actually the story has some excerpts from Lovecraft's novels, because Ted Klein was a scholar. He had made a thesis on Howard Phillips Lovecraft. It begins with the narrator saying that, starting a story with writing down, I'm sorry I can read it to you, but I've read it on translation, so I'll paraphrase here, but he says that there's nothing more comforting that somebody using first person past when writing a story, because this means that now he is in the present and well enough to write the story. So that's always guarantees a happy ending, even though this story doesn't have a happy ending, even though it starts with happy mishaps. So our author is on a plane, and due to some freak accident he ends up next to a former missionary in disguise who is coming to the US from Malaysia, where he feels haunted by a local tribe. He was a missionary to the Chochas, which rings a bell already, and he is heading to Florida. And our protagonist, who takes a liking to the guy, says that my sister is in Florida, go and meet her. So some time passes by. Our protagonist takes his grandson to a museum where he sees strange Malaysian cloth, and he finds that it's a Chocha artifact. Only the museum called a Chocho, and he immediately makes the connection to Lovecraft's Chocho tribes of Lang, and as he is shocked by this, and he starts to notice that something is way off with these Chochos and their worship of something darker, of this black man with a horn he saw on the piece of cloth, his friend Mortimer disappears. So he's trying to make sense of this mystery. He is making some discoveries, but nothing too immediate. It's not like a Lovecraftian story when he stumbles upon the Necronomicon or something, and he actually makes a comment about this, that it's not likely to find the Necronomicon. If the Necronomicon was real, it will be published with an introduction by Lynn Carter or something. That's a very poignant comment. That's quite smart. So yes, There is no oblique horror in the story. There is just clues coming up and a sense of dread, of danger in the background until the ending. It's a very Lovecraftian story without the hyperboles and the happy coincidence of a Lovecraftian story. It's about an older author trying to find out what happened to a acquaintance he had, and coming up with some clues about that he makes a connection about, and about this man with a horn and its nature, because it's a legend of the Chocho. It's a black man, so that can easily be Nyarlathotep or something, and there is some sinister connotation about this. A bit of casual racism because it's a Lovecraftian story, and xenophobia and all this stuff. And then we get to the ending, which leaves a very good aftertaste. So yeah, that was my first experience of reading T.E.D. Klein, which is a hard feat to accomplish considering how few works of his there are out there. And this is definitely a classic. This is definitely a Cthulhu Mythos classic in my opinion. It's very well written, very well paced, and it's got a very unique atmosphere. It manages to capture an element of Lovecraftian horror without aping all of the other stuff. T.E.D. Klein, and he's not Ted, he's Theodore Abon Donald Klein, but he uses T.E.D, so T.E.D. Klein, not to be confused with the musician, is clearly understanding his source material and how it works, what is Lovecraftian horror, and why it's so effective, and he can replicate that, and that's no mean feat. We have all read tons and tons and tons of Lovecraftian pastiches, and this one is not a pastiche. This is an original recipe of sort. It takes some of the elements of the Lovecraftian Cthulhu mythos story and works on them. It reduces them to their essential and then builds it up again to achieve the same exact effectiveness, the same appeal, without being derivative, and that's no mean feat. The stories I'm talking about, you realize that. So yeah, if you stumble upon the story, give it a read, especially if you're a Lovecraft fan. It's a great story. And yeah, I should probably go on track ceremonies at some point when I get rid of some of the other books I have, because my shelves are in a special sort of disarray these days, especially as I have to dig books from the rows behind the books I've got in the front. Yes, it's I'm following a 2 or 3 row system in my bookshelves just to get an idea of what's happening. So yeah, I've read in this here in this Greek collection from the early zeros. It's a collection of short stories, of fantasy short stories and horror stories. This one is a collection of horror stories. They did some books about Lovecraft or Arthur Machen, Clark Ashton Smith, Lord Dunsany, etc. That's it. I'll stop rambling. If you find, go and get it, okay? Thank you for watching.